The night my boss got drunk enough to forget her own name, I carried her out of a crowded restaurant while half the company watched. By sunrise, she was lying on my couch, staring at me with terrified eyes, and the first thing she whispered was, "Did anything happen between us?" I had no idea that one question would change both our lives forever. Before we begin, if you believe that kindness can give people a second chance when they need it most, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear a story about compassion, and subscribe to Bright Hearts. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. My name was Caleb Mercer, and at 38, I had become an expert at surviving quietly. 5 years earlier, my wife had passed away after a long illness, leaving me alone to raise our 8-year-old daughter, Nora. I had learned how to braid hair badly, pack school lunches, attend parent-teacher meetings, work overtime, and still remember that Nora hated tomatoes but loved strawberry yogurt. My life was exhausting, but it was simple. Every morning was about getting her to school. Every afternoon was about getting home before she finished her homework. Every night was about making sure she knew that even though the world had taken her mother away, she would never have to face life alone. To support us, I worked as an operations manager at a rapidly growing technology company. My boss, Vivian Hart, was the kind of woman people noticed the moment she entered a room. She was brilliant, demanding, confident, and almost impossible to impress. At work, she rarely smiled. She expected perfection and had a reputation for firing people without hesitation when they failed to deliver. I respected her, but I never pretended we were friends. Our relationship was strictly professional. That changed on a rainy Thursday night during the company's annual celebration. The business had just secured a major contract, and everyone had gathered at an expensive downtown restaurant. I had planned to stay for an hour, shake a few hands, and leave early enough to call Nora before bedtime. But then I noticed Vivian sitting alone at the far end of the table. At first, I assumed she was simply tired. Then I saw the empty glasses surrounding her. Vivian had always been controlled. That night, she was anything but. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes unfocused, and her hands trembled slightly as she tried to unlock her phone. When I approached, she looked up at me and gave me a smile that seemed painfully sad. She told me she was fine. I knew she wasn't. A few minutes later, she tried to stand and nearly fell. I caught her before she hit the floor. Several coworkers turned to look. Someone laughed nervously. Another person whispered that Vivian had finally lost control. I felt something tighten inside me. I knew what it was like to be vulnerable in front of people who were waiting for you to fail. So I helped her outside. The rain had become heavy, and Vivian could barely walk straight. I asked where she lived, but she struggled to answer. Her phone was nearly dead, and the address on her identification was an old one. I tried calling someone from her emergency contacts, but the first number went unanswered. The second belonged to a person who no longer worked at the company. I considered calling a taxi, but Vivian suddenly became sick beside the curb. I couldn't leave her there. So I made the decision that would create 1,000 questions the next morning. I took her home with me. My apartment was small, modest, and nothing like the luxury building where Vivian lived. It had a narrow kitchen, a worn sofa, and children's drawings taped to the refrigerator. Nora was staying that night with my sister, Maribel, because I had promised to bring her home early the next morning. I settled Vivian on the sofa, placed a glass of water on the table, and called Maribel to explain what had happened. Then I found a clean blanket and put it over Vivian. She looked at me through half-closed eyes. For one brief moment, the terrifying executive everyone feared disappeared. What I saw instead was a lonely woman who looked completely exhausted. She whispered that she didn't want to be alone. I told her she didn't have to be. Then I slept in a chair across the room. At least, I tried to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, I heard Vivian crying. I almost ignored it. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know what to say. Some pain doesn't want advice. It only wants someone nearby. Eventually, I walked into the living room. Vivian was awake, staring at the ceiling. She told me that her father had died earlier that year. She had spent months pretending it didn't affect her because she had a company to run and employees depending on her. She said everyone congratulated her for being strong, but no one ever asked what happened when she went home. I sat quietly. She admitted that she had been drinking because that evening had been the first time in months when she realized she had no one waiting for her. That sentence stayed with me. I knew that feeling. After my wife died, people had surrounded me for weeks. Then they slowly returned to their own lives. The calls became less frequent. The visits stopped. And one day, I realized that grief could be incredibly crowded at first and incredibly lonely afterward. I didn't tell Vivian that night. I simply listened. Eventually, she fell asleep. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a coffee cup breaking. I rushed into the kitchen. Vivian was standing beside the counter, pale and frightened. She looked at me, then at the blanket, then around the apartment. And finally, she asked the question that would make my heart stop. Did anything happen between us? For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. Then I understood what she was asking. I told her no. Nothing happened. I explained that she had been heavily intoxicated, that I would never take advantage of someone in that condition, and that she had slept on the couch while I stayed across the room. Vivian stared at me as if she didn't know whether to believe me. Then she began to cry. Not quietly. Not gracefully. She covered her face with both hands and broke down right there in my kitchen. I didn't touch her. I simply stood nearby and gave her the same thing she had given me the night before. A safe place to fall apart. When she finally looked up, she apologized for everything. She apologized for coming to my home. She apologized for making me uncomfortable. She apologized for being drunk. I told her she didn't need to apologize for being human. Those words seemed to hit her harder than anything else. Before she left, Vivian noticed the drawings on my refrigerator. One showed a little girl holding hands with a tall man. Above them, Nora had written, "My favorite people." Vivian asked about her. I told her Nora was my daughter. She smiled sadly and said she had never known I was a single father. I told her most people at work didn't know. She asked why. I said because I didn't want anyone thinking my family was an excuse for missing deadlines. Vivian looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something I never expected from my boss. She told me I was wrong. She said my daughter wasn't an excuse. She was my reason. That Monday, I walked into the office expecting disaster. Instead, Vivian called me into her office. My stomach dropped. She closed the door. Then she thanked me. I told her she didn't owe me anything. She said she knew. That's why she was thanking me. For the next few weeks, things between us changed. Not romantically. Not immediately. Something deeper came first. Respect. Vivian began asking about Nora. She remembered her school events. She encouraged me to leave on time when I needed to. She even told the entire management team that no employee should be punished for being a responsible parent. I watched her change too. She started eating lunch instead of working through it. She began going to counseling. She stopped pretending that strength meant never needing anyone. One evening, months later, I received a call from Vivian. Her voice was shaking. Her mother had been rushed to the hospital. She was alone. This time, I didn't ask questions. I simply told her I was coming. I drove to the hospital and found her sitting in a plastic chair outside the emergency room. She looked nothing like the powerful woman from the boardroom. She looked scared. I sat beside her. Hours passed. Eventually, the doctor came out and told her that her mother was going to be okay. Vivian closed her eyes. Then she started crying. I stayed beside her. She leaned against my shoulder. And for the first time, I realized something had changed between us. Not because of that drunken night. Because of everything that came after it. Months later, Vivian came to my apartment for dinner. Nora was there, proudly showing her a science project she had built from cardboard and old batteries. Vivian listened to every word. Then Nora suddenly asked her if she was going to be part of our family forever. The room went silent. I looked at Vivian. She looked at me. Neither of us knew what to say. Finally, Vivian smiled. She told Nora that she hoped so. Nora seemed satisfied and returned to her project. I looked at Vivian and asked if she was sure. She said she had never been more sure of anything. Then she told me something that made my eyes burn. She said that night she had been drunk. She thought she had been rescued from embarrassment. But the truth was, I had rescued her from something much bigger. From believing she was alone. And perhaps, without realizing it, she had done the same for me. Because after losing my wife, I had convinced myself that my life was supposed to be about survival, work, parenting, responsibility, nothing more. Vivian reminded me that surviving wasn't the same as living. Our story didn't begin with a romantic kiss. It began with a drunk woman asking a frightened question and a tired single father choosing kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. Years later, I still remember that rainy night. Not because something happened between us, but because nothing happened. Nothing except one human being choosing not to take advantage of another human being's weakness. And before you leave, I have one special request. Comment the word kindness below if you believe that doing the right thing, especially when no one is watching, can completely change someone's life. Because sometimes, the person you help on their worst night may become the person who helps you find hope on your darkest one.